Sooner Nation, Longhorn fans, welcome to episode 75 of the Bevo Podcast, the only podcast exclusively dedicated to covering the greatest rivalry in college football, University of Oklahoma, the University of Texas. I'm here with my man Kevin Miller. I am John Whitson. This is Red River Shootout Week Part 2. Kevin, this is going to be a dense episode. Warning to the listeners, this is not going to be one that builds on emotion or psychology or trauma or death, as discussed yesterday, which I know helped a lot of people understand their feelings, and I appreciate that feedback I received from many people. This is going to get into the weeds, the nuts, the bolts. You and I are going to show off our prowess of analysis as we break down the positional battles that are going to lead to the outcome of the most hyped OU Texas game since 2008. Are you ready for this?
Of course, man. We're one day closer to this game happening. I can't wait. The anxiety is already starting to build, man. So let's talk about it. Let's break it all down. Let's see what happens on Saturday.
Okay, before we get too far down, one note of something that we've been following all week is the betting line has jumped up another half point. Texas is now on DraftKings. That's what the Bevo Podcast goes with, is DraftKings. On Saturday, it was Sunday, it was a 5-point line. Monday, it was a 5.5 line. Today, it was a 6-point line. Today, it's a 6.5 favorite to Texas. Okay, Texas is giving 6.5 points. Thoughts?
Now, again, this has to be just because of the money, right? I heard that 90% of the money is going towards Texas when it comes to
correct.
betting. So that has to be the reason, right? I think you thought yesterday in yesterday's episode that could be a possible reason as to why. And I think it all but confirms that. Because I haven't heard any kind of team intel or injury thing that will cause that line to shift further towards Texas.
Yes, I said it yesterday, and I think I'm going to echo it again today. I think it's as simple as you beat Bama, you beat Oklahoma 49-0 last year. Like those two things are enough for people to want to unload on this line, even though the game is radically different, right? This is not the same OU Texas teams, not just a year older, but just a complete personnel shift older or newer, especially on the Oklahoma side. But even on the Texas side, you've added guys like Anthony Hill Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Jonathan Brooks is your running back. You lose Bijan. And we're going to talk about all of these guys. We're going to talk about all these guys, but it's different. It's a different set of circumstances. However, it's not unreasonable to think that's why you'd place a bet, because those two factors are pretty real.
Yeah, correct. Right. And again, got to handle business on the field, but this is just part of the process leading up to it. So, and it's motivational for the team that is the underdog.
Oh, dude, listen, Oklahoma thrives in the underdog role. We thrive. I mean, Baker Mayfield created the us against the world, blueprint for how you put a chip on your shoulder, you get angry about it, and then you react in a positive way towards, overcoming it. And I loved it. I loved what he did. We're seeing it now with Deion, right? Deion creates the underdog role for his team, even against a team like Colorado State that they should have beat the tar out of. So it's nothing new, but I do think Oklahoma thrives in it. And I think Texas should embrace being Big Bad Texas like you're doing this year. I like what Sark has created for you guys in terms of a mentality, because you are Big Bad Texas. You're ginormous. You're probably the biggest football brand in college football as far as brand goes. So I think you have to embrace
everybody hates Texas, right? Yeah. You got to understand, right? Everybody hates Texas, right? If you're not a fan, people who have nothing to do with Texas hate Texas. And yes, I hate Texas. Embrace that. You need villains. You're an OU fan, but even just fans of random programs, dude, we don't even play, right? And just embrace it. Every story has to have a villain. If everybody was just good, it just wouldn't work.
I think in the SEC, Texas is going to be more hated than Oklahoma.
Yes. Completely agree.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. I think, now Oklahoma starts winning some games or making any moves. I think obviously that can impact it. But early on, I think fan bases will love to host Texas in terms of just wanting to give y'all so much crap because you do make it really easy. Y'all do make it really easy. You'll agree with that.
In some ways, yes. Yes.
Okay. All right.
But I love it though.
All right.
It's fine. You can feel free to hate us. This goes to everyone.
We hate you. And I feel free to do it. And I thank you for that freedom that you've allowed me to do. All right. Let's get into the weeds of this matchup. Let's start with the clear place to start at quarterback. The matchup is going to be Dillon Gabriel versus Quinn Ewers. Okay. I've talked a lot about Dillon Gabriel being maligned as a passer by a large segment of the Oklahoma fan base. Again, it goes back, we've talked about it, goes back to being spoiled, whatever. The newest thing is he can't throw a deep ball. He doesn't have arm strength. Okay. As I looked at the numbers for this, okay, I want to compare numbers. I want this to be a very data-driven discussion, okay, Kevin? Dillon Gabriel compared to Quinn Ewers. Let's just start with completion percentage. Again, not necessarily a stat that speaks to arm strength, but speaks to decision-making and accuracy.
Now, we're talking this season only, right?
This season only. I'm going with this season. 75.2% completion percentage for Dillon Gabriel versus 66% for Quinn. And I'm going to make the argument, and I'd like you to agree or disagree. Gabriel's taken shots down the field, especially in the last 2 weeks. He didn't so much against SMU, but he did against Tulsa. He did against Cincinnati. Well, he did against Tulsa too. And he did against Iowa State. Yeah. So those aren't he's not just check down Charlie with that 75% completion percentage. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I do agree. He's hitting the intermediate stuff and deep down the field. He does throw an accurate deep ball.
Quinn, 271 yards passing per game. Dillon Gabriel, 318 yards passing per game. Does that surprise you when you hear that statistic?
Not really, because I know Texas loves to run the ball, and I think they've been so effective at running the ball, especially against Kansas, right? I mean, obviously they're balanced. They had 300 yards rushing and passing. But I think with their rushing statistics this season, it's taken the ball out of Quinn's hands a lot. And Sark likes that balance. And I think Texas has been more effective at running the football than Oklahoma has. So kind of, the offense has dictated that.
We are going to get to that, but just to put a interesting note out there, you have 192 rushing attempts. Oklahoma has 199 rushing attempts. So Oklahoma actually has more rushing attempts. Now that could be a number of plays situation too, where Oklahoma's getting more plays off because we have a little faster tempo offense. But when we get to the running backs, we'll also see that you're at 959 yards on the year. Oklahoma's only at 788. So you're by far way more effective running the ball. But I find that interesting. Touchdowns to interceptions. Dillon Gabriel, 15 to 2 interceptions. Quinn Ewers, 10 touchdowns to 1 interception. Both quarterbacks clearly taking very good care of the ball, making really, really good decisions. Dillon Gabriel, though, we've talked about it all year with the talent you have at wide receiver. Are you surprised Dillon Gabriel has 5 more throwing touchdowns?
Not necessarily. Again, I think to me, it just goes back to how well they've been running the ball. Now, if they were ineffective running the football and he still had those numbers, I would be concerned. But no, the way that they're running the ball, I'm not concerned about it at all. I trust in him to step up when his name is called.
Okay, that's fine. I'm all right with that. Now, here's the surprising stat, though, when we get to the not so much for Dillon Gabriel. Dillon Gabriel, 29 carries, 95 yards, and 4 touchdowns on the year. So he's, we've talked about this. He's not Michael Vick or anything like that, but the run game has become a bigger part of the offense since conference play started.
Yeah, correct.
However, for
and Teddy
Quinn,
Lehman told us that would be, right?
oh yeah, he called
It's
it.
come true.
100%. He called it. But how about Quinn Ewers? 25 carries, 74 yards, and ready for this? 5 rushing touchdowns. What's come on? I did not expect to get that stat to be as comparable to what Dylan Gabriel's done so far this year.
Yeah, neither did we, right? But it's kind of a new Quinn, right? He lost weight. I think he's 15 pounds lighter than he was last year. So I think he's discovered that he's got some decent athleticism to him. He's on pace to rush for more touchdowns than Vince Young did in 2005. We've been calling him Quincy Young, basically, when he's running the ball like that. Yeah, Quincy Young. Watch out. Might be a factor Saturday. And then, both quarterbacks.
Against Kansas, a 33-yard run. Is that right?
Correct. Yep, right up the middle.
Now, are these, for Oklahoma fan, are these designed runs? Are these scrambles? What do these runs look like? What should Oklahoma D be looking at in terms of preparation?
No, they're not designed runs. With Sark's offense, he does not typically design running plays for the quarterback. That's just not what his system is. But what he said in his press conference is that if it's there, if the defense is playing man and everybody has their backs turned and you see a wide lane, he expects the quarterback to take advantage of that. And that's what we've been seeing from Quinn. Just more pocket awareness in general, where beforehand he might wait and end up getting sacked when there's space for him to run and get the first down. Also, what we've seen over the last few weeks, before in the first few games, he's running to get the first down. Now, I think he's getting the confidence with his legs and he's trying to get to the end zone. And it's been effective. So, man, anything we can do to get points on the board, I'll take it.
Well, and I think it gives, one of the biggest criticisms that you've had against Quinn Ewers is throwing off schedule or in a off balance, right? Or, not in
mechanics. Poor mechanics. Yeah,
his mechanics haven't been good. So it makes sense that instead of forcing a bad throw or forcing a throw where you're not able to step into it or a collapsing pocket, to take advantage of that athleticism and run the ball. It only makes sense. And I think you've seen a more relaxed Ewers over the last couple of weeks because it's not that pressure to make that throw in as much as is just make the play, however that play develops.
Absolutely. Yes. Getting 7 yards on a run, that's a great play. And the thing about it is, too, the way defenses have to account for all the weapons that we have. When you got Xavier Worthy, Jatavian Sanders, Adonai Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, all out in pass routes, right? It takes the coverage away, right? And you don't leave a spy on a quarterback like Quinn, right? So it's just there. If the team is playing man, the space is there. It's got to take advantage of it.
Okay, so those are the stats for the quarterbacks. I think it's interesting that this is just my looking statistically, the edge goes to Gabriel statistically. I don't think I'm talking out of line. I'm not trying to make
numbers are numbers.
This episode is really going to be data driven. So while I'm used to being bombastic, I want to just say in this case, I think I'd put the check mark in the quarterback. However, we have to have somebody to throw to, and somebody is guarding those people that we're throwing to, right? So the next natural extension is to talk about the receivers for Oklahoma versus the secondary for Texas. So you talked about in the last episode a weakness at safety. You're concerned at safety. You think that could be an opportunity for Oklahoma to exploit. However, the statistics say that you have the best pass defense in the Big 12. You're holding teams to a 53.5% completion percentage, 196.2 yards per game passing, only 4 touchdowns. You have 6 interceptions, and as part of the passing game, your defense as a whole has created 13 sacks. That sounds like a really stout pass defense. What am I not hearing in those numbers?
No, everything you said is right. But if you want to talk about a potential weakness, right, the big plays that we've allowed this season have been allowed by opposing offensive coordinators scheming to get really fast guys on our safeties. And most safeties in coverage aren't going to be able to turn and run with a really fast wide receiver. So if there's a weakness there, I love our defense. I think our defense has been great all year. But if there's a potential thing for a team to exploit, that would be the place to start in the passing game.
Okay, so going up against that, we just read the stats for that secondary. They're going to be going up against a wide receiver core that is average. Now, these averages are total receiving yards for super geeks out there. I just want to be clear. These are total receiving yards, not just wide receivers. But in Oklahoma's case, it's mostly wide receiving, right? Yards. 352 yards a game, 131 receptions for 13.5, 17 touchdowns. So again, we're going up against a secondary that's only allowed 4 touchdowns. Oklahoma's had 17. Andrel Anthony, clear number 1. We've talked about this. 387 yards, a touchdown. Farouk, 285, 2 touchdowns. Here's the X factor in this game, and I've alluded to it earlier. It's Nick Anderson. I did not talk about him in the preseason. I know there was hype around Nick Anderson. I almost didn't want to jinx it, but I think we can say now he is a big-time playmaker. He only has 279 rushing yards, but 5 touchdowns. The guy is Mr. Touchdown. And then in terms of a possession receiver, you got Drake Stoops, not huge on the yardage, but huge on possessions, tough catches over the middle, competitive catches, move the chain type guy, and has 4 touchdowns on the year. Kevin, we did not know where the production was going to come from in Oklahoma at wide receiver. But now when I talk to you about those 4 guys, you've got to be thinking to yourself, possibly this is the best test of wide receivers you've gone up against this year.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree. And like you said, before the season, even going back to the end of last season, we were like, who's going to be productive at the receiver position for OU with the guys we lost, losing a guy like Marvin Mims. But Jalil Farouk has been solid. Andrew Anthony has been, I think, better than anybody, at least than I expected him to be, right? He's shown to be a consistent playmaker down the field. His hands have been better. That's what we heard was his weakness at Michigan, right? Like he had inconsistent hands. His hands seem to be working out very well for you guys. And with his speed, it just really fits into the scheme that you guys run. No, go ahead. What were you saying?
No, I'm just saying his hands have been pretty consistent. They've been the best part of him. He's made very competitive catches. Very competitive catches.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, the position that just, to me, overperformed the expectations that I had. And yeah, the emergence of Nick Anderson, it really gives defensive coordinators something else to account for because he's a big target with legitimate speed. And like you said, he's just been a big-time playmaker for you guys. So it's just something that the Texas defense is really going to have to account for.
So what's missing in this receiving team, this receiving core for Oklahoma is just a complete lack of any play at the tight end. Stogner might be averaging a completion a game, maybe. Blake Smith has a touchdown on the year, but really it's non-existent, especially for what Oklahoma's used to in terms of tight end production. So when we get to Texas, we're going to be talking a lot about your tight end. But when you look at those 5 receivers, give me I'm going to let you pick this one. I'll pick the next one. So you'll pick this matchup. Who do you like better? Oklahoma wide receivers, Texas secondary. It doesn't mean one's definitely going to do it, but just who do you feel like has the edge in this particular matchup?
I think I'll take the Texas secondary in this one.
Wow. Surprise, everybody. Yeah. Surprise. Mm-hmm. Those colors don't run, do they, Kevin? Those colors don't run.
You know what it is, man.
Listen, we don't know.
Again, listen, I said earlier. I just said it. The OU receivers have been better than I expected them to be. I think they've been better than you expected them to be. Right?
Oh, absolutely. I thought for sure the strength of our offense was going to be in the running game. 1,000%. I never expected to have this level of production for wide receivers. It's awesome. And to have guys that we can count on to make big plays and not have the drops that we had last year and some of the boneheaded plays we had last year. I haven't even talked about Jaden Gibson, that guy, or Jaquiz Petaway, who hasn't got a lot of run. Brennan Thompson, we saw last week with a couple big catches. So there's even upside outside of these 4 guys. However, This is the best secondary we're going to face, hands down. Clearly, they're the number one secondary in the Big 12. I don't know where they rank nationally. Number one secondary in the Big 12. Y'all are really, really, really good. And so it's going to be a fascinating matchup to see who's really, really, really good is better. And right. I kind of put you on the spot. You have to pick your secondary because I'm going to pick the receivers. But at the same time, this matchup, this isn't like a lopsided matchup where you're like,
no.
OU's going to roll or Texas is going to just completely shut down.
And, and that's the beauty of your scheme. That's the beauty of your scheme, right? You get it just takes advantage of speed. You guys spread out sideline to sideline, trying to create one-on-one matchups. And the slot fade is really the stable play of the Art Briles offense. And you put Andrew Anthony there, you could put Brennan Thompson there, and you can put Nick Anderson there, even though he's a 6'3" receiver. And match him up against the safety, and it's like I said, it's concerning. That's my biggest concern from your offense is go routes and deep post routes against isolating the safeties one-on-one. We saw Jaron Thompson give up the big play against Alabama, and we saw Keaton Crawford give up the big play against Kansas. Now, again, that was the only play that they got really in the passing game, the entire game. But it's just something to look out for.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
We'll have to be on high.
So now let's transition to the reciprocal side of the ball. So now let's take a look at Texas wide receivers. Texas wide receivers who the name power alone is if I read you the names, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jatavion Saunders, I'm including him in this, and Jordan Whittington, that sounds like the best receiving core in the country. It sounds like the best receiving core in the country.
Man. I mean, the only rival I think they have is the guys out of Washington. They got a really good receiving core. But yeah, I mean, I love these guys, man.
And I hear you, and I'm not knocking you, but take a look at this. You're averaging 286.6 yards per game passing versus an Oklahoma that's averaging 352. You're not averaging, but you got 10 passing touchdowns and only 101 receptions versus 131 receptions and 17 touchdowns. So almost like what we looked at with the Queers and the Dylan Gabriel, if we just looked at receiver versus receiver and you took the names away, if you took the names away and you just looked at the stats, you'd have to pick Oklahoma as having the advantage on the receivers end. But we know that not just with the eye test, but what we've seen in the past from a performance standpoint last year, what we've seen running directly at me in the Cotton Bowl on the very first play in 2021 is you've got uber talented receivers. How do you explain, though, the difference in production to this point in the year?
Really, it just goes back to how well we're running the football, right? We've seen these guys when called upon, right? We saw what A.D. Mitchell did in Tuscaloosa. We saw what Xavier Worthy did in Tuscaloosa and what Jatavion Sanders did in Tuscaloosa. And the reason why, that was the game plan, right? Alabama is really tough to run against, right? I don't care how good you think they are or are not. They make it really difficult to run the football against them. And they made it difficult for us, but that was the matchup, is beating them in the passing game. So that's what we had to do to win the game. I think with Sark, honestly, he's known for his passing concepts, right? And taking those deep shots. But at the end of the day, he likes to run the football. When those guys are called upon, I would trust them more than almost any receiving core in the entire country.
So, and I think what's interesting, I didn't go this deep in the analysis, but you bring up a really good point because I know what I saw at Alabama, and I know the shots that you're referring to. They were big shots, big plays, speed catches, the whole, speed over the top, the whole, take the top off the defense, all the analogies that are used to describe it. That's what your offense looked like against Alabama. It would be interesting to see how these stats compare to just the Alabama game. Because what would be fascinating to know is how come you could throw the ball so well against Alabama, but not against Rice, Wyoming, and even for periods of time against Kansas in the first half, right? That's weird, right?
The Kansas one, we had 160 yards passing in the first half. We just couldn't get into the end zone. And again, Quinn had 300 and something yards passing. We had 300 yards rushing. We lit up Kansas. We just didn't score for some reason when we got to the red zone. We just screwed it up down there. But if you look at the Kansas game, the game plan was different. It wasn't over the top because Kansas actually had a really good secondary. I think, their corner, Kobe Bryant, I'm a big fan of. I think this guy's the NFL corner. He's really good. So, but we killed them in the middle of the field in the intermediate routes. We had guys going across the middle of the field open all day long, and Quinn was hitting him in stride. That's how we won the game against Kansas. So what I like about our guys is they can beat you deep, right? But they can also beat you running routes across the middle of the field, those deep crossing routes. Sark loves those too. And Quinn, that's really where he's at his best at. He's at his best when he's working the middle of the field. He can hit the deep shots at time. That's where he's been the most inconsistent. But the middle of the field, Quinn is deadly.
So I tell you what makes me nervous when I look at this receiving core is Jordan Whittington has essentially taken what I would say is a back seat to Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jatavion Sanders. His numbers are, he is definitely the fourth out of four.
Correct.
But I feel like
he's got 12 receptions, 142 yards, and no touchdowns.
No touchdowns.
This year. Yeah.
But I feel like the talent level is there to force an Oklahoma to deal with the other three. He could have a big day. Like that's what he actually makes me more, because we know what we're going to get from Xavier Worthy, and so we know what we have to roll coverage to. We've seen A.D. Mitchell take the top off the defense. We know what we're going to have to roll coverage to. We know that we're going to need to have a linebacker in Deshaun McCullough. I mean, well, maybe just Deshaun McCullough himself, but we know that we're going to probably have to have a linebacker in Deshaun McCullough on Jatavion Sanders in the passing game, right? That's going to leave some one-on-one matchups for Whittington, and that's the one I worry that y'all exploit in a kind of a counterintuitive way, if that makes sense. Like he's not numbers, but for me, that almost makes me nervous.
Yeah, he got the experience, right? And we've seen him make plays against OU in the past, right? So the environment won't be too much for him. He's got the experience. He's a great route runner. He's a really good blocker. So, yeah, there's only so many ways you can roll coverage, right? You can really only roll coverage to one player. So, for me, it's almost like a pick your poison situation when it comes to covering these guys. And so, to me, like the secondary, I know you guys have really good players in the secondary. It's just so hard to account for so many really good players at receiver.
Okay, so all right, let's talk about that secondary. It feels so good to hear you say we have a good secondary, because nobody has said Oklahoma has had a good secondary in the last 15 years. It feels like
has been
definitely in the last 10. I guess that takes us to 08, so maybe not that long, but definitely the last 10 years. Last 10 years, we haven't had a good secondary. We've had some players that have been good. Trey Norwood showed some stuff. Trey Brown showed some stuff. We had Pat Fields that people liked. But listen, dude, Pat Fields isn't starting on this secondary. Pat Fields isn't seeing the field with Bowman and Bowen and Pearson and oh golly, who am I even missing out there? Key Lawrence. Like he's not seeing the field against these guys. And so we have elevated our secondary personnel to a point where we're really, really competitive. Comparable to your secondary stats, yours are a little better. 54.5% completion percentage allowed, 212 yards passing allowed, 5 touchdowns. However, big statistical number here, 10 interceptions. And in the passing game, we've created 8 sacks. So y'all have the check mark in touchdowns allowed, yards allowed, and sacks created, where we have the pretty healthy lead on interceptions. My point is, you talk about rolling coverage. Let me ask you this. Woody Washington gets talked about almost zero because he's so good and nobody throws the ball his direction. So you know a little bit more about this than I do. Is he good enough in your mind, if you're put your Oklahoma defensive coordinator hat on, is he good enough on your mind to line up against whoever's on his side and roll coverage to whoever's on the other side? Is Woody Washington able to lock down either Worthy or Mitchell?
I mean, I think he can cover those guys. but it's just hard to cover them for a whole game without them getting loose, man. I mean, Xavier Worthy has it all. He's got blazing speed and he's a good route runner. He's one of those guys where he can really sell his routes. So he can run full speed like he's running a go route, which means the corner will really turn his hips and start to sprint, and then he just stops, and it's a deep curl route, and he'll get open that way. That's how I think they can be effective against a guy like Woody Washington, where he might not be able to just run right by him on a go route, but he's such a good route runner. I think he can make some plays against any DB, including Woody Washington. Even though I respect Woody Washington, I think he's a really good player.
Well, I guess okay. So then my next question is to you: is he the guy you line up against Woody, or do you do with AD Mitchell and try to take him over the top and out of the route tree, and
honestly,
maybe try to expose the other receivers? I don't know, or the other secondary members.
Yeah, I don't know.
What are your thoughts? How do you attack this secondary? Yeah, how do you attack the secondary?
Well, again, you try to find out who is weakest in coverage, right? And who do you think that would be? Like, if Reggie Pearson's out there, right? We all know how physical he is, but can he cover an Xavier Worthy running down the seam, right? Or can he cover JT Sanders running down the seam? That's always the biggest matchup is the safeties, because 9 times out of 10, the safety is not going to be able to turn and run with the receiver like a corner can, even the good ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gentry Williams. I know Gentry Williams has locked down that other corner spot. He's a little banged up, but I think he's fine. I think
I'm sure
you've got Woody and Gentry.
Right? Like if you can walk, he's gonna be out there.
You've got Woody and Gentry at each corner, and then you've got some combination, okay, of I think Billy Bowman. We know for sure some combination of Billy Bowman, Reggie Pearson, Peyton Bowen, Key Lawrence, Deshaun McCullough. I mean, those are the 5 guys. And other dudes are getting some playing time. I don't know how much they're going to get against Texas. I don't know if this is the game where the number of participants gets smaller because we're trying to concentrate talent. But those are your 5 guys. And I got to tell you, this might be the best receiving group that y'all have had in, I don't know, a really, really, really long time.
Oh yeah.
This is also the best.
I can't even tell you when.
This is the best secondary Oklahoma has had in a very, very, very long time. I am fascinated by this. I can't wait to see if the concepts that Venables creates to attack your offense, if our guys have absorbed that enough yet to because we saw the busts against Iowa State. Those were concerning. If we see busts like that, I don't know that we can recover from. We're going to have missed plays, but receivers running free, that's the nightmare scenario for Oklahoma on Saturday.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's the same for Texas. We talked about this with Texas earlier, right? What you don't want to see is wide receivers streaking by safeties wide open. Just can't have that. And for OU, yeah, it's curious, right? Because have you guys trailed at any point this season? Have you been down more than a score, than a field goal or something? I'm trying to think.
Not more than a field goal. I think we were down a field goal at Cincinnati.
Okay, early in the game.
Maybe.
Like a 3-0 or something like that. Yeah, I mean, so yeah.
Something like that.
Curious to see how it would be if you got down 2 scores, how you would respond from a mental standpoint. It's tough, right? It's one of those things when you start off the season like that and you just haven't been super challenged. I'm fascinated to see how you guys will respond to that if that ends up happening on Saturday.
All right. The other facet of the offensive game plan and then the defensive game plan to match it is in the running backs and the rushing game. The way I've broken this down for listeners, watchers on YouTube is we're going to take a look at the running backs, and it just made the most sense in order to discuss the players to have the running backs paired up against the linebackers, right? That's kind of a natural fit. They're going to be doing the run fits. They're going to be the ones shooting the gap to try to take out the running backs. So that's how we're going to discuss it. It's obviously not a like for like necessarily, but I think it gives a good way to kind of compare. Taking a look at Texas's running game. Kevin has been big on Texas's running game. 192 attempts, 959 total yards on the year, 5 yards per carry. Jonathan Brooks, by far your workhorse, 86 carries, 597 yards, 6.9 yards per carry, which is healthy,
Very.
and 5 touchdowns. Clearly the best running back in this game, Jonathan Brooks. And it's really not even close. CJ Baxter is your next guy up. Coming off a little bit of an injury. We think he's feeling better. 37 carries, 157 yards, 4.2 yards a carry, and 1 touchdown. The linebackers that will have to stop Jonathan Brooks, Danny Stutzman, 49 tackles, an interception and return for a touchdown, a fumble recovery. The other starter, Jaron Kanik, 22 tackles, getting a lot of support from Kobe McKenzie, Kip Lewis. They've allowed 531 total rushing yards as a defense and 106.2 yards a game. So, Kevin, when you look at that matchup, I know you love Jonathan Brooks, but does it concern you at all that you're going up against the best linebacker play Oklahoma has seen since Kenneth Murray and maybe before that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great matchup. I've been a fan of Danny Stutzman since 2021. He was a true freshman out there. I mean, they trusted him enough to be out there in crunch time in 2021 in that game during the historic comeback that you guys had against us. So I've been a fan of him for 3 years now, and you've finally seen it all come together. He's confident now in Venables' scheme, right? He seems to be doing everything well. He's always around the ball. And I think what he's really gotten good at this year is dropping back into coverage, right? We saw him have a pick 6. He's covering those kind of underneath routes. So first of all, when it comes to Quinn throwing the football, because Quinn loves the intermediate game, working the middle of the field, he's going to have to account for Stutzman dropping back in some of those passing lanes. But again, he's confident. Venables is very aggressive with his scheme. So he's shooting those gaps really quick and being able to make tackles for losses this year too, making big plays. I'm curious to see, though. He's so aggressive. I wonder if Sark's going to scheme something up to try to take advantage of his aggression with maybe some misdirection runs that attack him, because he's so aggressive. He gets to the ball so quickly. I'm just curious if that's something that's going to be in the game plan for Sark.
When I know we're talking linebackers here, so when you talk about that, and we're talking about Jonathan Brooks, what does your screen game look like? Is that something where if Venables gets too aggressive with Stutzman and Kanik, and we're coming on a blitz, we send an extra rusher, what does your screen game look like? And how is Jonathan Brooks in the screen game, or maybe even CJ Baxter? Have they been a threat in that sort of,
Brooks
let
really
the defense come in?
They run that play. I think you talked about it. You and I talked about it, where they kind of run the offense. Everybody kind of sprints to the right, and he turns and throws it back to Brooks on a screen pass. And then we've got a couple of blockers out there. He scored twice on it already this season and had another really big play with it. So I'm sure that's a play that they like to run a lot. You may see that or some variation of that play. But no, he's been really good catching the ball and getting upfield on those screen passes. So that's why I'm so curious to see how Venables attacks this defense. Does he go crazy with the blitzes? Because we all know Venables can scheme up some really exotic blitzes, corner blitzes, nickel blitzes, safety blitzes, double A gap blitzes, just everywhere. Or, does he have everybody kind of drop back? Does he drop 8 into coverage? Because really that's where we see Quinn struggle the most, is when everybody's in coverage and they're not a lot of passing lanes. So it's a fascinating matchup for the game.
When teams have gone wide on us, like the quick pass game out to the flats and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Oklahoma's defended those really, really well with linebackers and secondary. So for me, that like we talked about the Xavier Worthy play in 2021, quick hitch out he beats one guy and it's a touchdown. Those don't frighten me nearly as much as they used to. Like, we seem to be a lot more sound fundamentally and in our protections. However, I worry about us being a little too aggressive, especially in a Texas game, getting fired up and amped up, and then being able to drop it off to who's clearly the best runner in the game, in this game. And that to me is, I could see Sark using our aggression to his advantage.
Absolutely. That's why I'm so fascinated to see what Venables' game plan is going to be from a defensive standpoint, right? Because I think Venables may be at its best when he's aggressive, when he's got linebackers coming from all directions, he got safeties coming, corners coming. It just gives a lot to think about. But again, it's Sark, right? So it's just a chess match between those two.
Okay, if we flip the script and take a look at Oklahoma's running backs and Texas linebackers, we've talked about quarterbacks and wide receivers and both teams, and then we talked about running backs and linebackers for Texas and Oklahoma, respectively. This is the one area that I feel like Oklahoma is in a big deficit. Everything else has been like, oh man, this matchup's great. Oh, this matchup's good on good. Oh, this matchup could go either way. Or, oh, this matchup, maybe a slight lean one way, a slight lean the other. We're not good. Our best running back is Tawee Walker, 38 carries, 193 yards, 5.1 yards a carry, 2 touchdowns. Marcus Major, 51 for 199, 3.9 with 2 touchdowns. Our leading rusher in touchdowns is Dylan Gabriel, I believe, with 4. Y'all have allowed 473 total yards, 94.6 yards a game. The longest you allowed was 62 yards. You've only allowed 2 touchdowns. Jalen Ford has 32 tackles and 2 interceptions. David Benda?
Yeah. Just Benda.
Benda, 25 tackles and 1.5 sacks. I feel like if there's an area for Texas to exploit, this is that area.
I agree, man. And it's funny because we talked about the receiver position for OU potentially being a weakness, and we thought the running game would be a huge strength. And the guys we talked about, right, were Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk. And we've kind of seen them buried a little bit on the depth chart. They haven't got as many carries. I know Sawchuk, I believe, has been banged up, right? But so far, they haven't been nearly as effective as we expected them to be, with 28 carries for 128 yards, 4.4 a pop for Barnes, and then Sawchuk was 17 for 49, 2.7 yards a pop and a touchdown. So yeah, it's been a little bit confusing. I just expected this running game to be a bit more dominant this year. So what do you think is the reason for that?
Well, first of all, I have to think that with Javonte Barnes and Sawchuk, it has to be injuries. I can't imagine what I saw in the Cheez-It Bowl last year was an aberration. Florida State was returning all their players, and our guys ran all over them, and they looked really, really good doing it. And so to think that they forgot how to run just doesn't make sense to me. So with those two, I feel like it has to be injury. So that gives you, a very experienced player in Marcus Major. This podcast has talked a lot about Marcus Major over the last 2 years. He's turning into a serviceable back, right? He's serviceable. He seems to pick up the blitz well. He's a physical runner. But at the same time, 3.9 yards per carry is nothing to get too fired up about, right? Tawee Walker, he's a walk-on. He looks really good. He's clearly our best back, but he's a walk-on. And it's hard for me to wrap my brain around that. And I think it's hard for a lot of Sooner fans to wrap their brains around it. So I think when you ask what could be wrong with it, a little bit could be personnel. We're going to talk about the offensive line, but I think a lot of it's scheme. I don't feel like Levy commits himself, and I really don't know the difference between the two, but there's the zone run and then the gap run, and one works better, one works the worst. I'm not even going to pretend to guess which one is better. However, whatever one he doesn't want to commit to, and therefore we don't get a lot of running yards out of it. But to me, the biggest deal is yards after contact. Even when we get hit, our guys aren't making plays. They're not breaking tackles. And so you can say a lot, but I really, at the end, after 5 games, to me, it's a personnel issue. Tawee Walker, Marcus Major, and then maybe a little bit of scheme. And so it's frustrating. It's concerning. And here's the deal.
We have to remember too. You guys did lose 2 tackles last year that were really good, right? You lost a guy who was picked in the first round in the offensive line, and you had another one who you lost to the NFL, Wanye Morris and Anton Harrison. So you lose 2 really good offensive linemen to the NFL. That is going to affect your run game.
Agreed. But Kevin, I think at the University of Oklahoma, you expect to do better than 4 yards per carry, and only have 788 yards through 5 games. I didn't do the calculation on that. What is that per game? 788 divided by 5. I mean, that's only 157 yards a game. That's only 157 yards per game. I mean, that's just, you don't expect that at Oklahoma. Now, we talked about this with like a big run that was taken away from Tommy Walker against Iowa State with a phantom holding call. That's fine. We maybe have had 1 or 2 of those, but that's not it. It's not, it's just not executing, not performing. And so, as it relates to, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but this offense is really based on how well you can run the ball. That's what gets the linebackers, the safeties to start creeping up, and that's when you can hit those deep shots, the slot fade that Baylor made famous under our brows. It's just such a huge play, and it led to Baylor's resurgence. RG3 winning a Heisman Trophy. Just the inside run, setting up the play action with those deep shots. So you've been able to hit the deep shots now, right? But I'm concerned. If I was an OU fan, I would be concerned that if the Texas doesn't have to respect the run, they could really drop back, and it won't be a lot of space there in the passing game.
Strong agreement. And I think what I was going to say, but it's backed up by what you just said, so I'm glad you cut me off, is it means that despite our lack of success, Lebby has to stay committed to running the ball against Texas.
And we talked about this in our recap of the last game, right? You did have 41 rush attempts against Iowa State. So he stuck with it, even though it wasn't effective. He just kept doing it and kept doing it. And I think, you just keep running, and eventually guys are going to start creeping up. And that's when the play action works. You get those deep shots. So I'm curious to see again how Lebby commits to the run. Can he do it the whole game? Because we've seen him last year jump off from the run, jump off of it, and the results weren't great when he did that.
Real quick on your linebackers, Jalen Ford, best defensive player on your team.
Yes. Well, we've got some other guys who we'll get to, but I mean, he's really good. First team on Big 12. Honestly, I thought he should have won Defensive Player of the Year in the conference last year, but he's off to a great start. And what's so great about him is how he makes plays in the passing game, dropping back into coverage. He seems to do it at big times. He's had multiple red zone interceptions. Multiple.
Stutzman and Ford might be first team All-American linebackers, and they still won't win Defensive Player of the Year for the Big 12. I'm just telling you that right now. Just don't hold your breath. It's pretty crazy.
Hey, listen, and I got to give you credit, right? Your bold prediction before the season was Danny Stutzman being first team All-American, right? We still have half the season left, but he's there. He's there. He's been as good as any linebacker in the country this year.
We talked about it with Teddy, though. We have to win games, right? Accolades come to individuals who are on teams that win games. So this is the type of game where Stutzman might even get outplayed by Jalen Ford. But if Oklahoma wins, the story will be how well Stutzman plays. If Oklahoma loses, it'll be how poorly Stutzman played and how well Ford played, right? Regardless of what the stats even say. So it's about this game is more about winning than it sounds weird to say, but the winner writes the narrative in this game, and they get to talk about how good their players were, even when they weren't as good as the players on the other side of the field. It doesn't matter. You got to win. And for those awards to come, we got to have a win on Saturday. All right, last segment. And we appreciate those for sticking with us so long. We know this is a very dense episode, but we felt like we needed to get this out there that, there are numbers behind some of this stuff. Oklahoma and Texas in the trenches. Starting with Oklahoma, offensive line, Walter Rouse, Savion Byrd, Andrew Rain, McCade Matuar, Tyler Guyton. Year to date, through 5 games, has only allowed 4 sacks. We've talked about the issues in the run game. They haven't been good. Going up against the defensive line, Sweat, Murphy, Sorrell, Hill Jr., Broughton, Finley, 8.5 sacks total from the defensive line. You've seen 5 games between these two, or 5 games with each of these 2 units. Who gets the advantage on the O-line or the D-line?
If I'm being honest here, I think this is the biggest matchup in the entire game. The biggest mismatch in the entire game. I think this Texas.
You think it's a bigger mismatch than the linebackers versus the running backs?
Yeah. I love this defensive line, man. I think they are big, they are strong, they are quick. They're hard to run on, and they are hard. They can get penetration from an interior pass rush. Byron Murphy has been unreal this year, and so has Devondre Sweat. The question for Texas going into the season was who was going to get pressure. Were they going to be able to get pressure? Well, Anthony Hill comes in as a true freshman who was a linebacker who played. He didn't play as an edge player in high school, but he showed that he had that pass rush ability during camp. And they're using him similar to the way that LSU used Harold Perkins, their All-American linebacker, who was also a true freshman last year. They said, we can get this guy on the edge, let him get upfield and make plays. And that's what Anthony Hill has done so far. 2 sacks against Alabama down there in Tuscaloosa. Ethan Burke has also come on. He's a sophomore, actually, out of Austin. And he's had a great start to the season. So, yeah, man, I really love this defensive line. I think they're the most dominant position for Texas, even more so than the wide receivers.
I think you're right. And I think the best evidence of that argument is your win at Bama. You don't beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa without a dominant defensive line. It doesn't happen. Because Saban will figure out how to run the ball. He'll figure out how to scheme against it. He'll do whatever it takes to use their size and physicality advantage. He was not able to do that this year in Tuscaloosa. And I don't know that this is the biggest mismatch, because I will say this. Beatonbow's offensive lines improve every single game, and they tend to peak when we play Texas in October in the Cotton Bowl. I know it sounds weird. I know that sounds like a homer thing to say, but it's a very real situation. They get better every single game. And I feel like the best game they have all year is the one against Texas. So right now, with what I've seen, agreed. Texas has the advantage in the trenches on the defensive line versus Oklahoma's offensive line. However, I'm not willing to just outright write off Oklahoma's offensive line. I still trust that Beatonbow is going to have these guys in a position to compete. It's just going to be a matter of how well they compete. This is the matchup, though. This is the matchup. If Oklahoma can hold these guys off and give Gabriel time to get it to those receivers, if this line can hold up and give the running backs some holes to at least keep Texas honest in the pass rush game, this is absolutely the matchup in terms of if Oklahoma's offense is going to score points against Texas.
Yeah,
so
correct.
I agree with you there 100%.
If OU can't block these guys, if they can't protect, if they can't open up some holes on the running game, honestly, I think it could be a long night for the OU offense. We'll see what happens. Again, I have the most confidence in this position more than anyone, at least in this particular matchup. And I actually like OU's offensive line. I think they're fine. That's how much I believe in this defensive line for Texas.
Texas's offensive line, I'm not going to go through all the players. You can real quick if you know them. Allowed 9 sacks, though. Oklahoma's offensive line has allowed 4 sacks. Texas's offensive line has allowed 9 sacks. What is your evaluation of Texas's offensive line through 5 games?
No, I'm good with the offensive line. I'm really good with that. You know,
Even
again,
with
you have to look at who we played.
the sack, real quick, even with the sack numbers.
Yeah, you have to. I think you have to look at who we played so far, right? Obviously we play Alabama. They've got great guys on defense. They've got great edge players. Okay. Now again, I don't think any of those sacks came against Alabama. I like how we've been run blocking inside. We've got some young guys who are really coming on. Kelvin Banks at left tackle. I think he's one of the best in the country. I think he's a future first round pick. Christian Jones at the other tackle is really good too. He's a 5th-year senior. You know, inside we've got some young guys that are still developing. And I think in those first few games, we saw a couple of busts from those guys. But I think they're getting better. DJ Campbell is a former 5-star. He's going to be playing right guard. He's a mauler in the run game. Still developing, though, when it comes to his feet and pass protection, right? Jake Majors is the center. He's a 4th-year player. He's a good player. He's a little up and down. Honestly, he's gets some penalties, but I think he had one of the best games of his career last week against Kansas, who surprisingly has a pretty good defensive line. They got some guys who can really get after the passer. I'll be interested to see when they play you guys later how they do, because they got some edge guys this year, that kind of edge guys that they just hadn't had before. They hit the portal really hard. But anyway, yeah, I really like our offensive line, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they can protect against that OU defensive line.
So Oklahoma, 5 total sacks from our defensive line. That's been probably the biggest complaint over this much improved defense, is the ability to pressure the quarterback. We're starting to see a lot more activity out of PJ Adebawore, although he's changed the way he's pronounced his name, right?
Oh, I didn't hear about that.
Oh, okay. Well, we're going to go with PJ Adebawore, but forgive me if that's not 100% correct. I think we're going to see a lot of him. I think he's going to be unleashed against Texas. I think he's going to see a lot of it, a lot of time on the field, and we're going to count on him to be really disruptive. Ethan Downs has been productive. I still don't know that I'm in love with Ethan Downs as much as I was last year coming into the season, where he was really, really hyped up, but he's been really, really solid. Marcus Stripling's got a sack. Bothroyd is the transfer from Wake Forest. We expected a lot out of him. He's been okay, but he hasn't been as dominant, I think, as at least I expected, and I think a lot of others expected. This defensive line is very much a workman's defensive line. It does not have the names outside of Adebawore and maybe Ethan Downs that the Texas D-line has. But I think they can get the job done. I think with as good as our secondary plays and as good as our linebackers are, the defensive line just has to do their job. They don't have to do a lot extra. They don't have to be counted on to carry the defense. If they do their job, we will have an effective defense on Saturday. And here's the thing. I agree with you that the biggest mismatch might be the O-line, D-line, at least based on what we've seen. Oklahoma's O-line, Texas D-line. Statistically, though, as I think about recapping this entire thing, I'm struck by the difference in numbers between Gabriel and Quinn Ewers. Like, as I recap all of this and I look back at everything we've talked about, Dylan Gabriel is significantly more efficient than Quinn Ewers. He's more efficient, he's more productive, he's more accurate, and he just has more, whatever the right word is. He's just, so far through 5 games, he's better than Quinn Ewers. And I don't think that can be overstated in a matchup in the Cotton Bowl. The better quarterback wins. The better quarterback often wins this matchup. And so
that's true,
I don't know. I just want to recircle back. I want to
have to take into account who you guys have played, though, compared to who Texas has played.
Okay, but look, dude, we've talked about this with Quinn. His best game came against Alabama. His second best game was against Kansas or Baylor. His two worst games were against Rice. His 2 worst games were Rice and Wyoming. So when you say, well, I got to take into account how he played, how come he's not patting his stats against Wyoming and Rice?
No idea.
How come he's not able to
I know is
to get to that?
The bigger the game, the better he plays. is what I've seen from him so far throughout his career.
Well, I don't know that that's. I don't know that I have an argument.
Yeah,
I don't know that I have an argument for that. But the potential for him not to play well, I think, is higher than the potential for Dillon Gabriel to not play well.
See,
I think the statistics.
If you look at Dillon Gabriel's stats over his career, though, he's been worse against better teams, whereas Quinn has been better against better teams. And I'm curious to see how Dillon Gabriel handles this environment, because we've seen what this environment can do to players, especially your first time in it. We've seen guys. I mean, we saw Kyler. We talked about him, right? He turned into Superman in the fourth quarter. We had two. The interception he threw was very uncharacteristic of him. Guys scrambling and fumbles the ball. Right? We've seen guys just come into this. Vince Young's first performance, he fumbles. He has running back 99 yards for a touchdown. We've seen great players come into this atmosphere for the first time, and it just does something to them. Baker Mayfield really struggled in that first game. This is a Baker Mayfield who would take y'all to the college football playoff.
I agree. I don't know. For whatever reason, and maybe for whatever reason, the numbers make me feel better, right?
Yeah.
The performance and the productivity had me almost convinced that I'm taking Dillon Gabriel over Quinn Ewers and feeling pretty good about it.
Hey, listen, I'm not.
Albeit, I will give you the fact. No, but I mean, I'll give you the fact that Quinn's he is. Look, we always get to come back to. He beat Bama and Bama. He demonstrated he's got a big time game when he steps up. He's also demonstrated he can lay some eggs. The eggs are becoming less and less frequent, though, and so Either way, I think this match. I think when we go statistically through it, matchup, OU slight edge on quarterback, really similar or slight edge on receiver, just from statistics. Huge edge for Texas in the running game. Huge edge for Texas defensively in the running game. Both offensively and defensively. And then when we look at the offensive and defensive line, I think we have to say edge to Texas in the trenches. You agree with that? Or do you still maybe not agree with the receivers?
I think our receivers are quite a bit better than yours, honestly. I know the stat, you guys have the stats, but I mean, if we're picking receivers, right? If we're drafting receivers, right? Like, who would you rather have? I think I would take our top 3 or 4 guys before I would take any of the OU receivers.
Let's timestamp this. 102 and 44 seconds on episode 75, because I think that you're going to rethink that and maybe put Nick Anderson higher up in your draft order after Saturday. I don't know if we're going to win or lose. I'm not.
Yeah.
I haven't picked a score yet or anything like that, but I think you're going to see a superstar emerge. A superstar emerges for Oklahoma. That is the history of this rivalry. It's the history of this game. This game brings out the stars. It brings out the stars, especially for Oklahoma. Maybe even more so than Kevin. Maybe even more so than Texas. It brings out stars, and I think this is an opportunity for a guy like Nick Anderson, who is a touchdown waiting to happen. Big, physical, fast, wide receiver who's been waiting to display his athletic prowess. This could be his game. And I've got it marked right here that you said he sucks at 102.45.
And listen to me.
You said Nick Anderson's terrible. You said Nick Anderson's terrible.
You already know how I felt about Rodney Anderson.
I'm disappointed.
You should be. Hey, it's hate week, bro. I mean, you know what it is.
I am.
Listen, you know how I like Rodney Anderson. Shout out to Rodney Anderson. He was a dynamic player. Look, you're not going to get me to say a bad thing about Nick Anderson. I'm just showing up for my guys.
Dude, listen. This has been great. This has been awesome. You are, and I'm not just saying this, I'm always impressed with how you break down a game, because you break down you can take the statistical and add it to the intangible and put it in a context that it's really easy to understand. And you've been that way since I've known you. And it's been whatever sport it is, and not just Texas football. But just listening to the way you broke this down, really impressive, dude. I loved it. I loved it so much.
Appreciate
and I'm so glad that we get to do a podcast together. I'm so glad we get to do a podcast together, because you made that really. I think people that are listening to this are going to say, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. So well done on this episode. For the diehard Boomer Bevo podcast fans that want a little more zany, a little more emotion, dude, there's still 3 days left. There's going to be plenty. You just buckle up, all right? You buckle up and get ready for it. But for this episode, we had to demonstrate that we sometimes know what the hell we're talking about. And I think we did that, Kevin.
Sometimes.
I think we did it darn well. What do you think? Yeah,
I would agree with that.
Especially this week. This week we did. I feel really good about it. Kevin, have a great evening. Boomer!
Okay.